So the Wicket gate, we talked about that a little bit this last week. What do you guys remember about the gate? What's specific about the gate that makes it unique? What do you think?
It was narrow.
It was narrow. And what did narrow mean? Do you remember what we talked about? There was a...
You can't bring anything with you through it.
Right. What was the other word for narrow that we used? It was more specific than just narrow. It wasn't talking necessarily about width. Remember we talked about the game show Hole in the Wall? Remember, it was, a better word would be constricted. There wasn't any extra space. There was just enough room for you, and that's it. So if you brought in anything else, your self-righteousness, your possessions, your family, whatever it was, you weren't going to get through this gate. You had to abandon everything to be able to get through this gate. Okay? So that's the gate that we're talking about here. And remember, that wasn't necessarily given to people that were sinners and drug dealers and everything else. He was talking to the Pharisees. He was talking to the people that were most religious at the time, most holy in an earthly sense at the time. So that's what Jesus was talking about when he talked about the narrow gate. So as he talks about this, what we're talking about is self-righteousness. Will you bring what you think is best through this gate? If you will, you'll never make it through. Okay? You have to abandon all and come through this gate on God's terms. So this is the point where Christian is. So in the process of time, Christian got up to the gate. Now over the gate there is written, knock, and it shall be opened unto you. He knocked, therefore, more than once or twice, saying, may I now enter here? Will he within open to sorry me, though I have been an undeserving rebel? Then shall I not fail to sing his lasting praise on high. So he finds at the gate. Now he finds this interesting comment. Knock, and it shall be opened to you. Okay, that's taken from Matthew 7. Okay, and in Matthew 7, we're in the middle of I guess closer to the end, of the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, so what is the context of knock and it shall be opened to you? In Matthew 7. We're just talking about general terms. What was happening in Matthew 7? So remember, we're in the middle of a section of Scripture where Jesus begins with the Beatitudes, blessed are the poor in spirit, and so on. And then he goes into a very long section of, you've heard it said, but I say to you. You've heard it said, but I say to you. And this is things like, do not commit adultery, but anyone looks on a woman with lust in his heart, he's committed adultery with her. Anyone that gets angry at a brother is committing murder, right? So we have all those sections. Now at the end of the section, there's this little sentence that says, knock and it shall be opened unto you. Now why would that fit? And why is it above the narrow gate?
It's an action.
It's an action, true. But what is it on the surface? What's it saying to do? It says knock, right? And what's the certainty of the action? It will be open to you. Is there any doubt that it will be open to you should you knock? No. Right? But it's the only thing said to do. You have to knock to get open it. Now, knock indicates the action, like we just said, but here's the problem. Isn't faith a gift of God? Well, then what opens this door? Because the door is closed. He arrives and the door is closed. It has to be opened.
Goodwill, God's goodwill opens the door?
God's goodwill will open the door, but not until...
Not until by faith you believe the message that says knock, the door will be open to you. You
right.
have to act on it and knock.
You got to act, right? You've got to knock. Now, if faith is a gift of God, right? But it looks like Bunyan saying, you got to knock before this gate's open to you. So does that mean that he believes in works-based righteousness? Works-based salvation? Why not? How do you explain
He could
him?
be Arminian.
He could be
Go
Armenian.
there.
He could there, but I guarantee you he wasn't. So what is he trying to picture?
The act of knocking didn't get him through the gate.
Right. But at the same time, the act of knocking did get him through the gate, right? The door has to be open. So remember, we have these. You got the human plane and you got the divine plane, right? We know that grace and faith are a gift of God. Okay, we know that from God's perspective. Now, from our perspective, what has to happen from a human plane? You got to believe. You have to knock. You have to come. You have to confess. Right? Will you confess if he's given you faith? Yes, absolutely. But from our human perspective, what do we see? We see someone acting on their faith, believing, actions, knocking, whatever it is, that they will do it because they believe. But we can't see their belief, we can see their actions. Does it make sense? Remember, this book is written from a human perspective. What does it look like to live the human life? What does it look like to experience the Christian life? And so there's a knocking. You have to knock. But if you do knock, it'll be open to you. So just understand that this is what Bunyan's saying. He's not saying you have to knock if you want salvation. He's saying you will knock because you're at the gate. He didn't get to the gate by himself. He got to the gate because God brought him there. Okay? Let's see. Now, he knocked, therefore, more than once or twice. All right, so what is that trying to communicate?
The degree of passion, that he's not just like, once and run away.
Right. So it's not like a secret chant or like a secret knock. You have to do that. This isn't that's what he's talking about. He's talking about intent. When Christian knocked, he knocked once. He didn't want to, he was so desperate to get in that it wasn't just a simple, hey, anybody there? It's kind of interesting. Kind of let me see what's happening on the other side. He was desperate to get through. And so he knocked more than once to make sure that he got noticed. Does that make sense? So what is Bunyan trying to communicate then with salvation? As we look at people that want to be saved, what is he trying to communicate? We live in a day where we have decisions for Christ, right? If you check the box on the paper that you want to be saved, that counts for us. If you repeat this prayer at the college, campus crusade meeting, Christmas meeting, then you're saved. Everybody stand up with me and recite this prayer. Now you're all saved, right? What will Bunyan's view be on that kind of salvation?
It takes more than just the perfunctory to be saved.
True. What does it take?
It takes, yeah.
On a human level. Remember, we're not talking. God knows who the elect are. We're not debating that. On a human level, though, what does salvation look like?
A wholehearted devotion.
A desperation, almost. Right? There is a significant amount of passion. There's a significant amount of desperation that I have to get through this. There is no other way. This isn't an option. This is my only choice. Does that make sense? It's like, I don't know. It's like in Star Wars where they shut the door and the door closes and they have this big random pit they have to get across. And so they can't go back through the door because they got stormtroopers on that side. They have to get across. It's his only choice. That's probably the worst illustration, but it's the first one that popped in my head, right? It's the only choice that he has. He cannot go back. And so he's knocking because if he doesn't, he's dead. Does that make sense? So it's not a decision for Christ. It's a passionate desperation to get through this door. And so he knocks. And Spurgeon said, one would think that they would hasten to enter, for a free and open invitation is placed over the entrance. The porter waits to welcome them, and there is but this one way to eternal life. He that is most loaded seems most likely to pass in and begin his heavenward journey. But what way ails the other men? Therefore I am in terrible earnest to get my hesitating friends over the threshold. Okay. At last there came a grave person to the gate, named Goodwill, who asked who was there, and whence he came, and what he would have. Now, this is interesting. What does it mean to be grave? Right? More grave than gravy? There's more gravy than grave to you, right? Scrooge in Christmas Carol. Okay.
Serious.
Very serious. Now, what does it mean to be serious? This is important because this is goodwill that comes to the gate, but he's grave. Grave is serious.
Recognize the reality of the situation and the consequences, kind of one way or the other.
Right. Does this mean that grave people can't be joyful? Do you see the difference? Grave does not necessarily mean a downer. You're not sad. Does that make sense? What you are is serious and sober. Because there's a situation that's difficult to understand. There's a situation that has gravity. And so this person that comes to the door is serious. He does not dispose to humor or levity, would be the dictionary definition. So as goodwill comes to the gate, we see that there's a guy that's going to open the door. And who's the door to the sheep? Jesus Christ. I am the great shepherd. In the same sentence, in the same section, he is the door to the sheep. He is the sheep gate, if you want to look at that section. So he comes to open the door. This is Jesus Christ, who's struck as grave. Okay, see if this helps. Alexander White says this. He was commenting on that. The gravity of the gatekeeper was the first thing that struck the pilgrim. And it was the same thing that so struck some of them who saw most our Lord, that they handed down to their children the true tradition that he was often seen in tears, but that no one had ever seen or heard him laugh. To be a man without sin, a man hating sin, and hating nothing else but sin, and yet to spend all his days in a world lying in sin, and in the end to have all that world of sin laid upon him till he was himself made sin, how sad a task was that! Great, no doubt, was the joy that was set before our Lord, and sure as he was of one day entering on that joy, yet the daily sight of so much sin in all men around him, and the cross and the shame that lay before him made him, in spite of the future joy, all the man of sorrow Isaiah had said he would be, and made light-mindedness and laughter impossible to our Lord, as it is indeed to all men among themselves who have anything of his mind about this present world and the sin of this world. They also are men of sorrow and of his sorrow. Okay? Does that make sense? So as goodwill comes to the gate, he's not necessarily lacking joy of the fact that here's a sinner standing on the gate ready to come across the threshold. At the same time, he also understands what's involved with that sinner coming across the threshold. Okay? It was a serious situation that brought him and brought joy to us, and yet is still significantly sober. So the grave goodwill comes to the door, and he asked him who was there, whence he came, and what he would have. Now, what do you think those three questions represent? And Peter, he says, be ready to give a... Huh? Right. And what does that answer? Yeah, it's a testimony, right? Let me tell you about what I believe. Let me tell you about why I believe it. Let me tell you about who I am and what I'm all about. That's essentially what Peter's talking about. And look what goodwill comes to ask: who you are, where you came from, and where you're going. 3 questions. Could you answer those yourself? Could you answer those about yourself? So Christian says this: here is a poor burdened sinner. I come from the city of destruction, and I'm going to Mount Zion, that I may be delivered from the wrath to come. I would therefore, sir, since I am informed by this gate that the way thither now if you are willing to let me in. All right. So what is Christian's answers? The first question: who was there? How did he respond? Poor burdened sinner. Is that his name? No. How did he respond? Why would he choose a poor burdened sinner?
That's who he is and who we all are.
Right. Now, true. But he's not talking about a general mankind thing, right? In Christian's mind, and this is important, in Christian's mind, the thing that describes him best to the porter is a poor burdened sinner. That's how I see myself. That's my self-image, right? It's not the image of mankind, though that's true. Here, who are you? I am a poor burdened sinner. Can you say that about yourself? Will you take it out of the hypothetical, all of mankind theological realm, and will you make it about yourself? Are men sinners, or are you a sinner. Does that make sense? So he says he's a poor, burdened sinner. I come from the city of destruction, but I'm going to Mount Zion. Now, coming from the city of destruction, why would he choose that? As opposed to an actual, I mean, it's part of our story, I know. But think about that. He gives a spiritual understanding, right? I'm not worried about what God's put me in. I'm not worried about my current circumstances or my situation. He doesn't even point to the burden. All he says is, I'm coming from the city of destruction. I know that I'm in trouble. And I know that I have to go to Mount Zion, because in Mount Zion, I will be delivered from the wrath to come. So what does that tell you about what he believes? Where is his faith? He doesn't know that yet, right? What he does know is, in the Old Testament, did everyone know about the cross and Jesus would come and live a sinless life and he's going to have 12 apostles? And did everyone in the Old Testament know that? Okay. Some people think that they had, Hebrews 10 and so on, where Moses gave up this and that. I don't think that's the way it worked. I mean, this is just me talking, but I think what they looked forward to was, they didn't know exactly how, but they knew that God was going to be their deliverer, that there was going to be a Messiah. And while they may not know of all the specifics of that Messiah and how it was going to happen, they knew and they trusted that God was going to deliver them, that he was going to send a redeemer, that he was going to provide a sacrifice, a substitute for their sin that would bring them safely to his presence. And so they trusted him wholeheartedly with that. They didn't necessarily need to know all about how it happens, which we, on this side of the New Testament, enjoy, but they trusted in him. So as Christian comes here and he's talking to Jesus, he says, I'm looking to Mount Zion because there I will be delivered. That's faith. You don't need to know all the ins and outs of it. What you do need to do is trust that God knows all the ins and outs of everything. That's not an excuse for ignorance. It's just understanding that there is this much faith that's needed. And it's all about faith. Trusting that God will provide that needed substitute. Okay? Keep that in mind, because that's going to come back to, we have to understand that at the end of this lesson. I would therefore, sir, since I am informed by this gate that the way thither, and that the way is this way, know if you are willing, if you are willing to let me in. Goodwill says, I am willing with all my heart. And with that, he opened the gate. That's awesome. Coming sinner, the Jesus to whom thou art coming is lowly in heart. He despiseth not any. He will bow his ear to thy stammering prayers. He will pick out the meaning of thy inexpressible groans. He will respect thy weakest offering, if there be in it but thy heart. That's what John Bunyan said. So when Christian was stepping in, the other gave him a pull. That, if you're ever looking for how do I explain sovereignty and human responsibility, that's a great illustration. The gate is opened. Now notice that who opened the gate? Goodwill. Who did the knocking? Did Christian open the gate? No. Was Christian passive in the gate being open to him? Yeah, he was. He knocked, but he had no effort in that gate being opened. Does that make sense? He has no key. There's no handle. There is no push. There is nothing that he can do to open that gate. That gate had to be opened to him by someone else. Does that make sense? He knocked, but he didn't open the gate himself. Jesus opened the gate, and Jesus let him through. So now as Christian's about to take a step through the gate, Goodwill reaches out and pulls him through. That's a great picture of God's sovereignty, right? As he's about to get through, it's actually God that pulls him all the way through the door. Now, why would he do that? Why would Bunyan picture this? This way. I mean, there could have been like a slide or something where he just gets on, he just rides a slide all the way in, kind of like the Ice Age section of where they get into the cave. right? It could be 1,000 other things that could allow him to get through. It could be a force field that comes down and surrounds him as he gets through. Instead, Bunyan pictures it as Goodwill reaching out and grabbing him and yanking him through the gate. What does that communicate?
A picture of just how much God desires to have us
Good.
close.
So there's that desire, there's that passion to pull him through, and
There's also an urgency, wanting to get us out of this.
an urgency. Yep.
Out of God's.
What else?
God's sovereignty in salvation,
Okay, how?
in that He does it and not us. So He's the one pulling Christian in. It's not Christian using his own strength to walk through the open gate.
Good.
Like, thanks for opening it, God. I got it from here.
Exactly.
I need you every step of the way, God.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a beautiful picture, right? There's a passion and urgency to getting him through the gate. But what's more, God's not willing to let him take that step. He's going to make sure that he takes that step. He's going to grab him and pull him through. So we've got both a passion and a certainty to the action. So Christian came and knocked, but it was Goodwill that opened the door, grabbed him, and pulled him through. Does it make sense? That's Bunyan's picture of salvation. Christian came, he has a burden on his shoulders, he knocks desperately to get through, he understands that there's salvation at the end of this road, and he needs to get through it. That's all of his contribution. Everything that actually matters, if you will, to actually completing the process is God opening the gate, God grabbing the sinner, and God pulling him through the gate. It was God's effort to get him through the gate. And when we talked about this straight gate, the way it's constricted, the only thing that gets you through this gate is to leave everything behind and let Jesus' righteousness guide you through this gate, because nothing else fits. And who pulled Christian through the gate? It was Jesus that pulled him through the gate. It was Jesus' righteousness that gets you through the narrow gate. Because your righteousness is like a blob. It'll never fit. Okay? So the door is flung open. He gives him a pull. Then said Christian, what means that? The other told him, a little distance from this gate there is erected a strong castle, of which Beelzebub is the captain. From thence both he and them that are with him shoot arrows at those that come to this gate, if haply they may die before they can enter in. Then said Christian, I rejoice and tremble. All right. So that adds an interesting wrinkle. So why did he grab him and draw him through the gate in our story?
The archers of Beelzebub would not.
Right. What would we call those people in our modern military language? Snipers. Right. That sounds a lot cooler than archers. Right. Although I have seen the previews for the new Robin Hood movie, and there's a lot more action in that one than I've seen in previous. Kevin Costner never did like falling off of a building backwards, flaming arrow kind of stuff. Prince of Thieves, 90s Robin Hood. All right. So, snipers are at the ready from a castle pointed right at this door, seeing if they can pick off people. And so why did Beelzebub have to pull Christian through the gate? Sorry, why did Goodwill pull Christian through the gate? So that, what's that?
Protection.
Protection. To prevent Christian from what?
From being shot.
And
Killed.
Killed before
Being saved.
he can get through the gate. Now, we just said that God does everything and certainly pulls him through. But here Bunyan's picturing that a Christian could get hit by an arrow before he can make it through the gate and never make it through the gate. Do those sound like they're conflicted?
Yeah, a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Because it sounds like somebody can knock, get through the gate, knock, and just as they're about to walk through, boom, they're dead. And God lost somebody. Somebody that honestly had faith, right?
Talk about this being on a horizontal plane, just Bunyan's perspective, where it looks like someone's about to go through the gate. They really didn't have the faith.
Right? That's your, remember, this is everything's on a human plane. This is what Bunyan's describing. What does it look like? Okay? Now, how many arrows were aimed and hit Christian? 0. Did he make it through? Who ensured that he made it through? God did. So as he's looking at this, and we talk about making it through the gate, will there be anyone that actually makes it through, that doesn't make it through the gate, that Goodwill grabs and yanks through? Nope. Okay? But when we're looking on a human perspective, how many people come to church? How many people have needs? How many people come and they say, oh, Jesus sounds so good. I really like the message you have. The sermon was so beautiful today. I thought it was great. I really want that hope. Have you known anyone that did that, and then a month, 2 months later, maybe even a year later, they get that job that they were hoping for? They're not so desperate anymore. Their husband leaves them anyways, and so they're out of their situation. Something changes about that situation. They're not so desperate anymore, and what do?
Go back where they were.
Yeah. They were on the threshold. It looked like they were knocking. It looked like they were interested. But ultimately what happened, they were like the soil, right? What were the soils? One sprung up right away. And when the heat came and killed it, it just withered away, right? Because it had no real root. So that's the situation we're talking about here. It looks like they're interested, but then Satan, with temptations and situations and arrows, knocks them off before they can actually get through. Because Goodwill never reached out and grabbed them and pulled them through. Does that make sense? So it's interesting that the sovereignty aspect of it is actually more in line here. Beelzebub will stop as many people as he can from ever coming through that gate. But God will never let anyone of his not get through the gate. Does that make sense? From our earthly perspective, we see people get almost there and then fall away. From God's perspective, that's never true. But from a human perspective, we see that quite frequently. This close, but this might as well be the Grand Canyon, because they never made it.
So we have to say, from our perspective and understanding, that for those people, they are either not to be saved, or that isn't the time.
Right.
It's one or the other.
Exactly. They never made it through the gate. Something about the situation, something about this world, something about the way Satan tempts them, whatever it is, stops them from going through the gate.
But we don't do anything different regards encouraging them, entreating them.
We can do all that,
etc., because we don't know.
Right.
And it's not our place.
That's not our place to know. We are like evangelists. We keep pointing to the gate, and we keep saying, there is the way to salvation. That's all we can ever do. We can't knock for them, right? We can't hold their hand up to the gate. All we can do is point them to the gate. Now, the other thing, too, how many people come to this gate and never knock? How many people come to church their entire lives, hearing sermon after sermon in a faithful place like this, that preaches the gospel almost every week, not even almost, every week you hear some part of the gospel, if not the entire thing, exegeted every week. And there are people that will come over and over and over, and they will never actually knock. They will sit on the threshold, they will look at the door, they will examine the door, they will look at the hinges, they'll admire the door, they'll think about how cool the door is, they'll know everything about the door. But will they ever knock?
What is the difference between, in the allegory here,
Mm-hmm.
standing at the gate and looking at it,
Mm-hmm.
and knocking? What's the difference between those two?
Passing through. The difference between just standing there on the threshold, the only way to salvation is progress.
Yes.
So if you ever stop on this path, you're in the wrong place.
So in the
right?
story here, if you knock, Goodwill will save you.
Absolutely. If you knock, Goodwill will absolutely save you. If you just stand looking at the door, it'll never happen, because you've never entreated him, you've never come to him, and you're just standing. Anywhere in this book, okay, almost anywhere in this book, if Christian is not moving, bad things are going to happen. Okay? This path is it's great to be where you are, but you're never asked to stay. Okay, there's only one place that you're ever allowed to stop in the celestial city. That's where everything goes. There'll be some rest stops along the way, but he's never allowed to just stop and stay there. because that's not his home. That's not the place where he's going to stop. And so if you just stop at this gate, it's as bad as stopping anywhere else on the path. You're not in the right place. You are asked to come and knock and then go through. All right, now we're running short on time. Okay, so you guys can read more. There's some great quotes in here from Oswald Chambers, Thomas Watson, talking about Satan's arrows and the elect and so on. Oswald Chambers said, "Lest we be terrified by our adversaries, it is well to remember that Satan's power is not inherent but permitted. It is not unlimited but controlled. It is not invincible but broken. It is not assured of success, but it is surely doomed. Satan knows well that there is no ultimate victory for him. The pronounced sentence has only been postponed. But he works to hinder and postpone Christ's final triumph. We can rejoice in the certainty of God's assurance. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world." So the picture here is not necessarily that there's this tipping point where you may or may not make it through. The picture is quite the opposite. You will make it through because Goodwill will grab you and pull you through. But understand that from our perspective, there will be people that will not make it through. Not because Goodwill didn't make it, but because they never knocked, because they didn't knock earnestly enough, because they didn't actually care enough to get through that gate. Make sense? They came for the wrong reasons. There's 1,000 other things that could happen. All right, moving on. So when he was got in, the man of the gate asked him who directed him thither. "Evangelist bid me come hither and knock, as I did. And he said that you, sir, would tell me what I must do." Okay, so that last one is a loaded statement. But real quick, when he was got in. It sounds like terrible English in our time, but what does that communicate? If he was got in. So this gate, let me give you the picture. When they used to have gigantic hedges for fences, the only way to get through these things, because they were really thick bushes, usually with some kind of thorns to keep you from getting in, you couldn't crawl in. They had to put a gate in if you wanted to get through. Okay, so this is a hedge of protection. It's a wall. It was impossible to pass through unless you went through the gate. So the fact that he got in tells you what? He's what?
Saved.
He's saved. He is in. He is safe. He is within the walls of God. Does that make sense? So when he got in, then the man of the gate started asking him questions. So he's safe within the gate. He is saved in our allegory. Goodwill has got him and pulled him through the gate. Now, evangelist said that I should come, that I should knock, and that somebody, you, would tell me what I must do. So what is Christians' understanding still of the gospel?
That he has to do something
To do what? To make what happen?
to be saved.
To get rid of his burden. Right? He knows that you will be the one that delivers me. So that was his faith. He already said that. But I'm assuming that I have to go do X, Y, and Z to get rid of this thing. I got to go light some candles. I have to go pray these beads. I have to go on a pilgrimage to Mecca. I have to go do something that will get this burden off my back. Okay? So even though he's saved, he still doesn't understand exactly what is going on. Does that make sense? Goodwill pulled him through, but Christian has a few things he has to learn still. So evangelist said, he says, this Goodwill says, an open door is set before thee and no man can shut it. Christian said, now I begin to reap the benefits of my hazards. Now, no, an open door is set before thee and no man can shut it. That's that's an important statement. Because what does that come from? Does anyone know?
Revelation.
Right.
Just to the churches.
True. It was given to the church in Philadelphia, if I remember right. Yep. And they were under the persecution. They were a persecuted church. So when he says the door is open and no man can shut it, what is he trying to communicate to this church? Perseverance. Because
you're saved, you're in the Lord, and He's going to make it happen.
And He's going to make it happen. There is a certainty to this door. It's going to be a battle to get through it, but you're guaranteed to get through it. You're not going to get there and be disappointed. You're not going to get there and find that it's closed. You fight and persevere because this door is open. This door is yours. So as he comes through, this is what he says. Christian doesn't have his gospel correct yet. He doesn't understand exactly what object he should put his faith in. He knows who it should be in, but he doesn't know what it should look like yet. And so Goodwill has to work with him. And so he says, the door is set before thee. And Christian says, I'm going to get the benefits now. He's like this persecution of Philadelphia. Why? Goodwill setting him up for the rest of his life. Does that make sense? When you look at your life, why do you live the way you live? Why do you run the way you run? Is it just because I'm supposed to be a Christian? Is it just because that's just what you do as a Christian? Is there nothing more to your walk than what you ought to do? If that's the case, you'll never make it. You'll give up. Because this race isn't great. Right? It's full of trials. It's full of trouble. It's full of tribulation. In this world, you will have trials. But take heart. What is it? I have overcome the world. Right? So what is the thing that Goodwill is setting Christian up for? Difficulty and reward. There is a reward that waits for you. A reward that makes everything in this world worthwhile. Everything, every trial you're going to have, everything you're going to face is going to be worthwhile. That door is open. It's waiting for you to step through. All you have to do is get there. Okay? And you're going to persevere. And God's going to get you through that door. But you have to get through it. And it will always be open for you. So Christian says, now I begin to reap the benefits of my hazards. He's absolutely correct. God is starting to bless him with a version of what he will finally enjoy ultimately. Does that make sense? He's starting to reap the benefits of his hazards. But he doesn't understand yet the gospel. Does that present any issues? Can you think of anyone else in Scripture that didn't know the entire story and yet was saved? The thief on the cross. Right? There's no way he knew everything to know about Jesus. And yet Jesus said, today you'll be with me in paradise. Why? What was the trigger, if you will, that prompted Jesus to give him that response?
Remember me when you are in your kingdom?
Right. He didn't need to know everything about Jesus. He just knew, this is the king. He's the one that can deliver. I'm asking him. That was it. So that's our situation with Christian. And he's starting to see the reward. So as we keep this in mind, as we debate sometimes, especially in churches like ours, what's the minimum gospel? What should everyone have to believe to really be saved? And all these other things that kind of rage in our Western scientific mindset of minimum standards and minimum expectations. Just understand, all Christian knew at this point is that this is the path to salvation. Whoever's at the end of this path is going to save me. I fully and wholeheartedly believe that, and I've left everything behind. That's all he knows at this point, and that was enough to save him. Make sense? All right, Goodwill. But how is it that you came alone? Because none of my neighbors saw their danger as I saw mine. Now, this is going to be kind of a lot of rehashing of things we've already talked about, so we're going to blow through it a little quickly. Did any of them know you're coming? Yes, my wife and children saw me at the first and called after me to turn again. Also, some of my neighbors stood crying and calling after me to return, but I put my fingers in my ears and so came on my way. But did none of them follow you to persuade you to go back? Yes, both obstinate and pliable. But when they saw that they could not prevail, obstinate went railing back, but pliable came with me a little way. But why did he not come through? We indeed came both together until we came to the slough of despond, into the which we also suddenly fell. And then was my neighbor pliable, discouraged, and would not adventure further. Wherefore, getting out again on that side next to his own house, he told me I should possess the brave country alone for him. So he went his way, and I came mine. He after obstinate, and I to this gate. Then said Goodwill, alas, poor man, is the celestial glory of so small esteem with him that he counteth it not worth running the hazards of a few difficulties to obtain it. Christian said, truly, said Christian, I have said that truth is pliable, and if I should say all the truth of myself, it will appear that there is no betterment betwixt him and myself. It is true he went back to his own house, but I also turned aside to go to the way of death, being persuaded thereto by the carnal arguments of one worldly wise man. Now, that's important, because what do we see in Christian with that statement? Humility. Right? This is not a man who's sitting there saying, I have made it through, yes, yea me, I put my faith in Jesus. Right? As he looks back at the sin of others, what does he see? His own sins. His own sins. He's not better than. He hasn't discovered some secret. He hasn't been the one to figure everything out, and so he pats himself on the back. He realizes that where he's at today is not of his own doing. He was just the same as all the other men. And if not by the grace of God, go I. Okay? Goodwill, did he light upon you? What he would have had you sought for ease at the hands of Mr. Legality. They are both of them a very cheat, but did you take his counsel? Yes, as far as I durst, I went to find out Mr. Legality until I thought that the mountain that stands by his house would have fallen upon my head. Wherefore there I was forced to stop. That mountain has been the death of many and will be the death of many more. It is well you escaped being dashed in pieces. So we talked about this before. Christian said, why truly, I do not know what would have become of me there, had not Evangelist happily met me again as I was musing in the midst of my dumps. But it was God's mercy that he came to me again, or else I had never come hither. Now, we didn't see this before, but we talked about it. What does Christian realize about his time on the mountain when Evangelist came to him?
Being in the midst of my dumps.
Right? And what happened? It was God's mercy, right? So, yes, he was sitting there, but what really came to save him? Was it Evangelist? It was God's mercy to send Evangelist. Do you see how he's now connected? He realizes that his situations are not out of control. They're not of his own making. Just like he was humble enough to realize that it was his sin, just like pliable sin, it was also God's mercy that rescued him out of his sin. Do you see how his testimony is really starting to form? He's making connections about who he is. This isn't just simply memorize this tract. He's making connections about how God works in his life. He's making connections about his own heart and how it connects to God's actions. Do you see these parts starting to move? This isn't just a simple catechism that he's remembering a bunch of facts about God and how he's going to be, God's glory, all these kind of things, all these buzzwords. He's making real connections between what he did, what other men have done, where he was at, and what God was doing in the middle of that. That's faith. When we start to see God in the work in our hearts, when we start to see how God is actually doing things, when we start to realize that the hand of God working in our life, that's when faith starts to bud. That's when we know who we're dealing with. These aren't just random things and I have to fill a checkbox. This is God working in my life for my good, and there's actually a real person behind it. Not a situation, not a theology, a person. Does that make sense? And that's what Christian's starting to realize. He came to me again, or else I had never come hither. But now I come, such as one as I am, more fit indeed for death by that mountain, than thus to stand talking with my Lord. But oh, what a favor is this to me that I am admitted entrance here. So, he's finally figured something out. Now, I come, I am better fit for death. What favor is this to me that I am admitted entrance here? Guess what Christian finally put together? Remember what we saw when he was reading his book? What did he always see? Sin, right? He saw a standard he couldn't fill, a reason that he should be judged, 1,000 things that would keep him out. Here's why the city of destruction is going to be the city of destruction. And then he read further, and we found out as he talked to Pliable that he said, if we can make it to the end, there's all kinds of, there's angels and people and all kinds of things. And we said there was one thing missing from his picture of heaven. Do you remember what that was? God. Right? And so he comes to this gate. He's got the burden. He knocks on the door. And now he makes this statement. What a favor is this to me that I am yet admitted entrance here. What has he just discovered? Huh? He didn't earn it.
He didn't deserve it.
Didn't deserve it. Good.
You see God's hand and God's grace.
Uh-huh.
Salvation. That is, his hope is now in the person of Christ, rather than just.
Not yet. But you're on the right track.
That he's looking at more than just the sin.
Right? He's looking at what? He's looking at more than just his sin. He's seeing. This is important, okay? This is the book of Galatians. If you read the book of Galatians, the beauty of Galatians is not that it's a Romans light, okay? I love John MacArthur, but that is an incorrect interpretation of Galatians, in my opinion. It's going to go there, okay? Galatians is all about the sufficiency of God's grace. How complete it is. And in Galatians, he talks a lot about Abraham. And he talks a lot about the blessings of Abraham. Okay? Now, what's he trying to get at when he talks about the blessings of Abraham? What's he going for? Don't you realize what was Abraham before God chose him? Abram. Just another guy. What was he after God chose him and made him the promises?
The father of many nations.
Good. So why does it matter that we're part of Abraham? Why are we included in the blessings of Abraham?
Because God promised that all nations would be blessed.
Okay, that's true. Why does it matter that you are part of Abraham's promise? Because that's what Galatians says.
Because it's only the faith of Abraham in our hearts that makes us adopted as sons.
Okay, good.
And therefore heirs of the promise.
Okay, so what has changed about us believing and not believing in reference to Abraham?
That we become his children.
Right? And if Abraham was blessed,
Then we are too.
because we are adopted sons into his family. We get the blessings of Abraham because we are part of Abraham's family. We are the clan. We are the tribe. We enjoy the promises of the father of the tribe. Right? When Jacob gathers all the tribes of Israel, the 12 brothers of Israel, and provides blessings and curses upon them, those were meant to pass down. It wasn't just to a single guy. It was to their whole family. That's the picture in the Old Testament. Everything's corporate in the Old Testament. Very few things in the Old Testament are ever given to one person. Remember, it was Korah that stood before Moses and complained. And so what happened to Korah? Well, the ground opened up and sucked him in, along with his family and 250 people. The Old Testament is very, very corporate. It's all about representative headship. Who the head is flows down to who follows and who's in that clan. Well, guess what? If we're in the family of Abraham, then what is Paul saying about belief in Jesus? Well, that opens up a huge door. You are now transported from being on the outside in the city of destruction to being on the inside of the gate, inside the hedge, with Goodwill as our gate, as our door gate, and you are now in the promises of God. And look what Christian is finally figuring out. What a favor is this to me? God is now not just the rule maker that promises curses and this far off heaven maker. He is now one that is showing favor to me. Do you see the difference? Now it's not just out of the theological realm. It's not just the blessings and curses. It's God blessing me. I actually have a relationship with God. God now knows me. I confess my sins and I see God's mercy to me. Do you see how there's a lot more now ownership? There's a lot more connections being made of who God is and who I am and how those two interact. It's not enough just to know you're a sinner. It's not enough just to know God's in heaven. What a Christian is now is realizing that through the cross there is favor. I know we'll see the cross in a second, but essentially what he's saying is God is showing favor to me. Right? I'm pulling a blank. When Jesus said, "Many will come to me in that day and say, Lord, Lord, did I not prophesy in your name? Did I not do all these things?" They were all active, but there was no understanding of who God was in their life. They knew all about him. They acted like they knew all about him, but they did not know him. And now Christian says, what a favor is this to me? Heaven is now connected, right? The angels talk to the shepherds. You're starting to see that same kind of idea inside Christian's mind. He now understood that favor was being given to him. Okay, ready? Here we go, really fast. We make no objections against any, this is what Goodwill says, notwithstanding all that they have done before they come hither. They are in no wise cast out, and therefore, good Christian, come a little way with me, and I will teach thee about the way that thou must go. Look before thee. Dost thou see that narrow way? That is the way thou must go. It was cast up by the patriarchs, prophets, Christ, and his apostles, and it is as straight as a rule can make it. This is the way that thou must go. So this is important. He says, here's the way. See that straight way? Go take it. Now, it's as straight as it can be. Now, why does that tell you something important? Because this is what Christian says. Are there no turnings or windings by which a stranger may lose his way? Okay, that's telling, because what does he think is going to happen on this path? And it's probably true. If left to himself, what's going to happen? He's going to lose. He's going to lose his way. But Goodwill says, yes, there are ways that butt down upon this, and they are crooked and wide, but thus thou mayest distinguish the right from the wrong, the right only being the straight and narrow. So how do I know which way to go? It's the only one straight. It's the only one that's in accordance with God's rules. It's the only one that's in accordance with God's word. It's the only one, in other words, he's saying, when you look at all the possible options that will come at different points in your life, there will be a correct way. And unfortunately, there will be a number of not so great ways. Okay? And unfortunately, Christian is going to follow them a couple times. Okay? But we'll see what happens to get him back on the straight way. Then I saw in my dream that Christian asked him further if he could help him out with his burden that was on his back, for as yet he had not got rid thereof, nor could he by any means get it off with his help. So Christian says, Jesus, what about this burden? He told him, as to thy burden, be content to bear it until thou comest to the place of deliverance, for there will fall from thy back of thyself. Now, that's important. What did we say the burden was? Guilt. Remember, we said the burden is not sin. If the burden is sin, and he's now made it through this gate, we have a problem. Make sense? Instead, he still has this burden on his back, even though he's made it through the gate. Even though he's saved, he hasn't got rid of his burden. Now, there is no second blessing or anything like that. This is allegorical. Which, in other words, when Bunyan says, keep it on your back for a little while before you get to the place of deliverance, he's doing that for illustration so he can walk you through a couple more pieces. In life, is that really what it looks like? Not necessarily, but just understand this is somewhat allegorical. He's going to walk us through a couple more things. Specifically, what he's going to walk us through is how Christian has to learn who Jesus is. Okay? His heart's in the right place, his faith is in the right place. Now his mind's got to be corrected, and then now he will have a picture of who Jesus is, and then guess what he's going to find out? Well, then he's going to see the cross in all its glory, and then his burden is going to roll off. Now, look what it says. It will roll off thy back of itself. What did Christian ask just a couple minutes ago? Can you get this off? And then right before that, he said, what do I have to do? Tell me what I have to do. And this is what he said. Bear it, it'll fall off by itself. You don't have to do a thing. What you do have to realize is what God has blessed you with. Because Christian isn't going to get some magic chant. He's not going to get a magic spell. He's not going to do anything magic. He's just going to come to the cross, and that's going to roll off of its own accord. Because of what he learns, because of what he finally engages in, because of what he finally sees through the eyes of faith. He will see the cross and the burden will fall off. But until then, he has to continue to bear the guilt until he understands what has actually happened at the cross. And that's where the whole idea of favor and Abraham's promises come into play. Once we realize how rich we are in what God has brought us into, what he has communicated us from and into, when we realize the full blessings of what God has given us into, then that guilt has to fall away. There's no other option. Once you realize how much God has blessed you with, how much he has forgiven you, that is the ultimate answer to guilt. It's not running, it's not getting involved in the church, it's not evangelizing and all these kind of things that we try to do sometimes to try to get rid of our conscience. It's looking on the cross and understanding what God has promised to us, what he has accomplished and what he has given to us. When we understand that, that is your answer to guilt. Right? But until that moment, until that time, that guilt will remain. And when we forget, guess what we get to get back? That burden will come back. Okay? And in Bunyan's picture, the burden doesn't come back as a package, it'll come back in a different way. So we'll see this as Christian has to deal with it, as Christian has to deal with guilt and sin and conscience and everything else, and then how, again, he's forgiven. Over and over again, he's going to be forgiven. Then Christian began to gird up his loins and to address him to his journey. So what does Christian once again want to do? I got to gird up my loins. That means, and that comes from 1 Peter. It was when people used to wear robes. If you wanted to really go into battle, or you didn't go to battle in your bathrobe, you tucked it in, and you kind of did the. In India, they do it all the time. So I'm trying to figure out how to explain it. But basically, you would tighten up the robe and kind of push it through the middle of your legs to form what looks like a diaper, effectively. But it allowed you to move. It allowed you to move a lot faster than if you had your robe to trip over, right? So that's what it meant to gird up your loins. Wrap up your robe, tighten it up, put on your diaper, and let's go to battle. It doesn't sound near as cool when you say it that way, right? So he girds up his loins to address himself to his journey. So what does he think he's going to have to do to get rid of this burden? I'm going to have to go fight for it. All right, let's do this. So the other told him that by that he was gone some distance from the gate, he would come to the house of the interpreter, which will probably be in for 2 weeks, at whose door he should knock, and he will show him excellent things. Then Christian took his leave of his friend, and he bid him Godspeed. And so Christian is going. Now, it's not a matter of if, but when he loses this burden. We're going to spend the next 2 weeks in the house of the interpreter. And it is one of the most brilliant pieces of this book. The pictures that it paints are amazing. It's also some of the best literature that has ever been written. So you're going to like that part too. So there's probably, I think, 5 pictures in there, all of different situations, all of different spiritual and scriptural realities that we'll understand, and we'll take some time to walk through. But some of them are fairly challenging. Okay, there will be a couple of them that are really, really cool. You're going to love them. And there's a couple that are very, very challenging, like the man in the cage. Okay, the man in the cage is extremely difficult to explain, as well as the man at the very end where he's stuck and he's watching the judgment of God. So we're going to have to spend a little bit of time on that. Other than that, though, there's the man that has to get across the bridge and take the castle. There's the man that has to, he's got a flame, and Satan keep putting it out, but it won't go out. It's really actually pretty cool. So there's some really cool pictures coming up in the house of the interpreter, and the picture is of Christian gathering the information. He's opening his Bible. He's now understanding the full breadth of what God has said, not just the curses, the full breadth. And that's what's going to lead him to the cross. Make sense? All right. Any questions? Bob?
I'm surprised that in the book it talks about him being led to the cross after salvation, when typically we think of you were led to the cross.
Yep.
And then you're saved. I'm anxious to see how that's.
Yeah, it's actually, when he comes to the cross, it is, I think it's 1 paragraph.
Oh, no.
He really doesn't. Bunyan's view, I think, of this, remember, he's writing this about the Christian life, not just about salvation, right? So he's not necessarily vested in trying to illustrate every point of salvation. But when he looks at the cross, what he's realizing about the cross is what God's already taught him from the moment he left the city of destruction to the point now where he's standing in front of the cross. And so the cross is really the fulfillment of everything that he's already seen. it is the ultimate, right? It's at the top of a hill, and he realizes it as he gets to the top of the hill. But that hill is what God's already been doing. So it's almost kind of like, I want to say it's anticlimactic. It's kind of the climax, but everything else building up to it is the beauty to it. And the cross is what kind of puts it all, that ties it all together. But it's what we're going to learn about who Christ is and what God has done in the house of the interpreter that really gets his mind straight, so that when he looks at the cross, now he knows what he's seeing. Does that make sense? He doesn't devalue the cross or try to make it less than the center, but he also understands that the cross itself, the actual cross, is just the cross. It's all that the cross brings to a head that really forms the salvation of a Christian. Does that make sense? Any other questions?